and welcome to my channel. My name's Helen and I generally talk about creativity, journaling and art forms of various varieties. Today I'm going to show you how to make the least intimidating art journal you've ever made. It's really easy and you can use all the things that you've got lying around the house, especially if you're a bit of an arty person and maybe you've bought a couple of things over the years that you actually didn't get around to using. But even if you didn't, there are ways of using things around the house to make your own art journal. There are lots of things sitting in your recycling bin, for example, that are going to come in very handy. Before we get started on the step-by-step of how to make this journal, I want to talk a little bit about the why we might make this art journal. I think perhaps like me, you might have walked into a shop at some point, an art supplies shop, and looked around and found the perfect sketchbook. And you've taken it home with all these good intentions, but unfortunately it either doesn't get used or the first few pages get used, you decide what you've done is absolute rubbish and it just sits gathering dust or ends up getting thrown away. So that is a waste of money and a waste of time. And the reason that that probably happens to myself and perhaps to you as well, if you're watching this at home and you relate to that, is because that beautiful, perfect sketchbook is just far too intimidating. We know that the works we create in that sketchbook are going to be imperfect because we're learning as we go. I can only speak for myself, but I'm not making things that are going to be hung up in the Royal Academy and people are going to ooh and ah over them as the most amazing piece of art ever made. I enjoy art because it's good for my self-care, my mental health, and creative expression is something I've always enjoyed. And sometimes I'm really pleased with what I've made, and other times I'm like, well, that could have gone better, but I enjoyed the process. For that kind of work, for work that you're not going to be sending off to competitions to win big art prizes, and that's just not my jam, maybe it's yours, but if you're just starting out anyway, you need something not that intimidating. So I've decided to make my own art journal to take away all of that intimidation, and with every single element as I'm putting it together, what I'm thinking about is that intimidating? Is that going to put me off working with this material because I'm scared of ruining it? So every single aspect of this journal is designed to be the least intimidating it can be. And if you have any other ideas about how it could be less intimidating when I finished it, if you think, well, that was really good, but actually if it did this, it would be even less intimidating, then I would love to hear about that in the comments because I'm going to be making these journals for myself all year. And I would imagine that other people would also want to hear about what you've got to say. So if you've got wisdom to share, we are here to hear it. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get straight into the step-by-step of how to make the least intimidating journal we have ever used. So I started off by finding some pieces of paper that I'd ripped out of an old notebook. I don't even care that they are ripped along the top. That's just going to add texture. And if I wanted to, I could add extra bits of paper and things to the top there to extend the page further. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. This is supposed to be not intimidating after all. I then found a piece of scrapbook paper and that's going to be the cover. But you could use any piece of cardboard in your house. You could find something in the recycling bin. You could find something like an old book cover and use that as your cover for your journal. Something sturdy, perhaps a hardback that maybe is going to end up in the recycling anyway. So you remove the hard cover off it and use that. So any piece of cardboard, anything sturdy, you can use that as your cover. I have made whole journals out of pieces of trash from my recycling on this channel before. So if you are unsure about how you would go about that, just take a look at those videos. I will link to them below. And it just goes to show you can make any kind of journal from a piece of trash. I then decided once I had cut down my signature so that it was going to fit in my cover, that I was going to just layer some materials on top of this scrapbook paper. The reason this is a really good project for me is that I actually don't use scrapbook paper that often. I get given it as gifts and it just kind of sits there because I'm more of the kind of junk journal persuasion and I tend to use materials that are scrappy and kind of can be upcycled. So these covers that I'll make for these journals, it's a good way of using up my scrapbook paper, but as I say, you can use anything that's lying around for your cover. And when it comes to layering these pieces, I'm just using things that I've got in my stash. That was a piece of packaging, the brown piece, and now I'm going around and inking a piece of music paper. Even the ink, you don't have to buy ink. I've seen people use boot polish. and that works just as well. I think really you can blend a bit of eyeshadow with some water and that would work. So there's lots of ways of kind of digging into what you have around your home if you don't have like things like ink. I'm now going through just some things that I've cut out of magazines over the years and just pulling out some random things to go on the front of this art journal. I want it to be random. I want it to not really make much, sense in inverted commas. I just want it to express that artistic things are essentially going to happen between the covers of this art journal. So I'm not trying to make something that really means anything on the cover. I'm just trying to think about where I like the elements sitting and then putting them together in a composition that makes sense to me. If you don't have any magazines, you can cut out of junk mail. You can cut out of old books. You can ask friends and family if they've got any magazines going spare. It's also worth asking at your local library if they've got any old magazines or books that they're going to throw away. You could pay them a nominal donation for that, or they might even give you them for nothing. You could also look in thrift stores that tend to sell magazines for very, very cheap prices. So lots of free and cheap options available when it comes to making the cover of this journal. I did play around quite a lot with these elements, and some of them did not make the final cut. I substituted other things. It's okay to take a little bit of time over arranging the elements because this is something that you want to work in. What you want to avoid is making it so beautiful that it's too intimidating to work in. And that's why I'm using very cheap free materials, upcycled materials, to make it as unintimidating as possible. Once I glued down the magazines, I then decided that I wanted to add some trash to the cover. This very much goes back to my junk journaling roots, and that's really where I got started with arts and crafts in a serious way. I think because, just as this project is, it was unintimidating. I didn't have to worry about ruining a piece of trash because it was just trash, so it was very difficult for me to ruin it anyway. So I decided that I was going to sellotape pieces of the chocolate orange wrappers and packaging to the front of the journal to give it that kind of slightly trashy feel. And that to me helps it feel less intimidating. Now I did start doing a 3-hole pamphlet stitch here, and then I stopped myself in the middle of this, realizing that there was a better binding for an unintimidating journal. And that is a simple twine binding where you just wrap a piece of twine, ribbon, string, even a bootlace would do it, round the journal to hold the signature in place. And the reason I thought this was a particularly good idea for an unintimidating journal is because you can then slide the papers in and out. So if you create something really horrific that you don't want in there, you absolutely can just slide the page out and slide a new one in, and no one will be any the wiser. I'm going to try not to do that when I'm working in this journal because I actually want to try and keep the progress of my art journey intact. But if I really do create something that I can't stand the look of, I can just slide it out of this journal and there's no problem whatsoever. No one will ever really know. The last step in sort of making this an unintimidating space to work in was to cover some of the pages so it's not a brand new sparkling notebook, and to sort of put something down on the page, anything at all, doodles with a pen, some acrylic paint, just anything to make it not a blank white space. I haven't done this in every page for the video, but I probably will do it before I start working it for real. It doesn't matter whether or not I actually use those markings. I might decide to glue over them completely. Just having them there means that I don't have to worry about the intimidating blank space of the page, and I can get to work gluing things over. If I want to cover it up, I can cover it over with gesso. I can do whatever I want. The point is I've got something started and I don't need to stress about this being the first mark that I ever make on the page. I can just get started and see what happens. And that's really the whole point of this journal. I hope that you found this interesting and that you do think the journal is easy to make. It is simply a matter of wrapping some string around some paper and decorating the front of the cover. I think most of us can probably manage that. Even if we're not totally thrilled with our cover composition, we can add to it over time. Thank you so much for watching this video. I wish you all the best with your journaling habits this year. There'll be a new video soon, but until then, take care and I'll see you next time.